lose them, right? So it's important to catch them. So distorted belief, particularly distorted core belief, they make it interesting for them. If they say, oh, it's a manualized approach, we do ABC, they could lose interest. But when you throw examples to them, and you can challenge them to think about those cases, right? They will be interested. That this is interesting, not just like a little manual thing that I just apply, right? They get inquisitive. They will discuss those situations. Okay? So again, the automatic thought, the core belief, right? Look for that type of distortion, okay? That they may have. Particularly those are deep-rooted. Now, deep-rooted distortions are not easy to remove. So you don't want necessarily say, oh, you could change that, but just be enough to be aware that they have that. If they acknowledge the fact that, oh yes, why am I so upset with Maria? There's a reason beyond Maria, right? Then they'll be interested to resolve that sort of rejection. You don't have to deal with them then, but then they wouldn't go in the wrong tangent to go and solve the relationship with Maria. Okay? So that's important as a little starter. Now, I know people don't like the word attribution, right? Okay? So on the handout page 18, you can say how the mind explains things. That's attribution. How the mind explains things. The mind always try to find reasons, right? People, other than being a habitual person, because we don't want change. People also want things to make sense, in their mind, right? So, for example, if I don't like Dennis, I'm not going to go to a movie with him. That's what we call a dissonance. The word cognitive dissonance means that the two things are contradictory, right? So remember that in university or colleges, right? You might have done a project like this, okay? People who have a certain idea, such as they may be discriminatory to a certain type of people, right? They were asked to actually interact with them, or they were actually asked to research and write something good about them. Having done that, right, they change. Because the belief and the behavior cannot contradict. So if I were to, if I were to go to a movie with Dennis, or interact with him more, either I'll begin to like him, or I would say, I can't ever go again. He really is the bad person that I thought he was. That I would distance myself. But at least that has to be consistent. That's the human mind. Again, that's a good thing about not needing to be a judge. You don't have to have all the wealth of evidence, but you look for inconsistencies. You look for what we call dissonance, right, in their own mindset, to help them see that, yeah, it is indeed distorted thinking, right? Okay, so you look for that in the core belief that, and you move them in a direction that they can make it so-called synchronic, right? So that my relationship with Maria will be okay, not disrupted by that situation, right? Now, there are a few things that we wouldn't go into detail, but again on page 18, we talk about permanent, pervasive, and personal, the 3P. Very often things that get us into trouble is something that is not just here and now, but permanent. Not only that, Maria doesn't like me, but she would never like me again. Talk in extremities, right? If I lose my job, that's not good, but I say that I'll never find a job again. That's permanent, right? Pervasive is that not only would I not find a job in advertising, which is my field that I love my job, I would not find any job. That's pervasive, right? You know why? Because it's not about the job, it's about me. I'm probably a very useless person. That's personal, right? So again, we try to tackle those 3 Ps in terms of, the distorted thinking, in affecting the way they feel. Because again, remember that the idea is not to change the mood so much, but the mood change would be a consequence of it. The stress in this situation is that if I see that my best situation is not permanent, it's not pervasive, it's not personal, I'll be less stressed because I have hope, right? Without saying so much to them, they'll see those changes. I think someone has asked this question before. What's the difference between CBT and, IET, right? Just for us to be sort of aware of. We're more familiar with CBT. IET is rational motive therapy, which is Albert Ellis was the one who advocated this many years ago. But it's sort of like subsumed, and CBT take a big umbrella. The only one difference I would say is that CBT would also did the evidence base. Did she not like it? The RT would go straight into that more belief system, such as people should like me. So they would go do exercise like such as extreme exercises, called like shame attack exercises. So they go extreme that, like, okay, if I'm embarrassed, right, to speak out, they would say, okay, why don't you go to, let's say the traffic light outside Shepherd and, Fairfield Drive, whatever, right? Stand there and do crazy things, right? And just like do whatever, right? If you manage to get a client to do that, which is not easy, right? But is that behavior telling that if I even do such crazy things, that nothing bad happened? What's the big deal about speaking in public, right? So, okay, this is the idea, okay? I mean, maybe an example, right? But the idea is that if you do something more extreme, right, it may be easier for you to tackle something a little bit less stressful, right? But you have to think about your example that apply to the situation. But along the line, CPT, although we say ABC, it doesn't always need to change the B. Particularly, often it is very entrenched. Now, we must see is the consequence. It's not just, consequence can be what are the consequences? It could be emotional consequences, it could be behavioral consequences. Very often people who have been stuck, remember we are animal habits, right? Stuck in a certain way, sometimes we have to change the behavior before we change the thought. If you can convince them to change the behavior a little bit. Because remember that, the dissonance and consonant, they cannot have discrepancies, right? If I do something differently, to begin with, maybe my thought begin to change. And you see that sometimes, the example I gave is that it's often A, B, C, C, B, A. It's become a cycle, right? Because if I believe that Maria treated me nastily, I'm going to talk to her, right? Maria thought that like, what's the big deal? Who are you? She actually become more distant from me. Then I thought that reinforced my theory. See? She stuck up, not knowing the fact that she was reacting to my behavior. Now, any question before we do look at one or two examples? Any comments or? Look like you're all waiting to go for lunch. So let's go for the well, at least there are two parts. One is that different in applying CBT to different situations, different age group, different genders, different cultures, right? People with different mental cognitive conditions. Doing that in individual versus couple or group situations. People tend to be more rational versus emotional. People with a lot of life experiences versus people with younger or more fresh experiences. People who come from a more sort of like individualistic society versus more like communal society, right? We think that in all of these there are differences. I think so. I mean, like they are all in a situation, but we just start to subgroup them, right? And yet they're also sometimes more, the differences may not be because they're different gender. The differences may be because they think differently, right? The differences may not be because one is older and younger, but because experiences are different. So beware not to just typically classify them as male, female, younger, older, or whatever, right? But think about what is it that driving the differences. For example, people are more experienced, older. What's the difference in terms of CBT?
More cognitive belief.
Exactly, the cognitive are more entrenched. You're not going to change someone's belief who has been there for 30 years. It's much easier for someone who, right? On the reverse, people who are younger and who has this gung-ho belief, they also don't have experiences to tell them that life is not so black and white either, right? So you got both ways. But therefore, not just go with the categories, but think about what drives that in the differences, right? Or people who come from a more individual society, more like North American, right? Hey, teenagers, why I think, who care about my parenting? As opposed to different culture that the communal part, the family part, the society part is the one that drives, right? But all these are going to impose on their belief that they are going to counteract in dealing with the situation. So let's take one or two examples. Why do you pick, given the time we have? The stress manifesting. Why
Second one.
Second one.
Oh, sorry. Before going there, I have a question about people with mental illness.
So we, for the self-help group, having this, we do some screening for some of the workshop. For example, the speech workshop something, and then some of our workers believe or think that some clients are not suitable for certain workshop. They think that like personality disorder or schizophrenia. So are they also like they said, because for people with personality disorder, they just feel for every day or every moment, right? So how can we reason with them and say that how do you feel about this comment or this kind of like?
Well, I think that in terms of in CBT, of course, it has been adapted, right, to use for people who have psychotic episodes, right, or people who have chronic illnesses, or even people with borderline personality. Now, as I said in the beginning, those were not the population that CBT installed to work with. They're more for the depressed, anxious top clientele, right? I think that I don't think it has to be ruled out, but I think that if you have to pick and choose, that may not be the one that you put in the workshop, because like you don't have the ability to individually cater for the need. You just sit in there, expect that you're just like a sponge. So that may not be the best if you have other things that are more for that, right? So I wouldn't say that those are the best clientele. I don't think that you need to rule them out, but for a workshop situation, without individual follow-up, you may let loose a bit about what they take with. So I'll be a little bit more careful with that, right? But just to comment on that, like I think that people have distorted thinking, right? Not just because of what we mentioned, but because of hallucination and delusion. You know, I think when people apply CBT, it's not necessarily to, first, it's not the primary treatment, right? It can complement with the medication, all the stuff, right? Or supportive therapy and all that.
Yeah.
But moreover, the idea is not necessarily to eradicate the voices or the delusion, but for them to understand. For example, someone may say that, you know, like, I do believe that, you know, there's someone from Mars to come and check me, right? That's one thing. But to realize the fact that, you know, I had this before, I had heard this voices before and all that. So they may have some kind of attribution to explain that thought that would help them to reduce their anxiety, right? So it's a complementary approach. But to go back to your question, yeah, I think that for a workshop, not having the time or necessary skills that go into it, I'll be careful to use that in those situations.
Because these are all workshops, like kind of difficult for us to screen who's coming and who's not coming, right? So I guess, like as the person who's going to conduct the workshop, we may encounter like participants who being a little bit challenged for us during the discussion, right? So we just had to learn how to stay away, right? That is what Emily said. Like, how should we do that in a group setting? Like, how should we avoid those kind of incidents happening, or we happen like the first time we may not have that kind of sensitivity to know that okay, this person may be a little bit different, right? So, but like, so once we know on the second, the third,
They were already in the
we
session.
know that this person has some challenge, is to be some challenges for us. So how should we deal with that, I
I
guess?
think maybe let's go back to the question, maybe that's why Lucida was asking about, or someone else was asking about, or you were asking about a group setting or
Yeah.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I actually enjoy working group because they bring a lot of dynamics.
Yeah.
And it's also more economical, right?
True.
But it poses some challenges.
A challenge, yeah.
Why I like group is because it, you actually diffuse the situation. You got other members who are like clients, participants, not just like you are the facilitator, I'm all going to argue with you, right? And you can also sort of like use it in a way to people either echo the point that you're trying to make, or to invalidate, which is also good too. Like I was going in this tangent, but all of you are actually going this tangent. It informed me that I'm in the wrong direction, right? So that's okay too. Now, I think for people who are a little bit challenging or difficult, you know, firstly, you have to cater for the majority of the group, right? Because there may be 7 people. You're not going to lose 6 to salvage 1 person, right? So, you know, and if indeed they go in tension and the person sees that the other people are not on his side, right? They really want to move on. This person was sort of like not make it difficult, right? To upset everyone else. So I think you can use a dynamic to say that who wants to go on with this, or who wants to discuss this one. You say, oh, we want to move on, right? Then that's okay. But if the person is not trying to be challenging, but he's challenging, business issues are different, right? Then you have to address them and say, you know, so and so, why don't we focus on this afterwards? Why don't we do it afterwards? So breaking out the session to deal with it, not to ignore the person, but sort of like, not try to resolve it, but just say basically that it's something we have to sort of like to deal with.
But then it also brought another issue is like, because we are not, as far as I know, the mental health worker there, we are not trained as a counselor. So even though the police say, okay, I'm not going to adjust it now, but doesn't mean that I can adjust it at the end of the workshop, because I may not have that kind of capability to do it, right? Because this is all I know from CBT, right? Or like 2 more sessions from Dr. Fung, but doesn't mean that I can be a counselor myself. So like that is also another way that we need to be careful.
But when you say that you want to address it outside the session, it doesn't mean
That you have to do it.
You have to solve his or her problem. Right?
Yeah.
You can, after
Yeah.
outside the session, you may say, hey, this is something you may need to talk to some professional.
So reinforce the role
Yeah.
and expectations.
You don't want to escalate
Yeah.
the situation, you want to diffuse the situation, you want to address
Yeah.
at least the emotional aspects of it, right? But this is our stress management, right? So the A is the fact that Mr. So-and-so said something. My emotional reaction is fact, I don't like this, right? And then I've asked myself, like, what am I thinking? My thinking is the fact that, I don't know how to control this, right? But I don't need to control it. I don't need to solve all this problem. I just need to manage to put goes on. His need is being addressed. He doesn't feel abandoned. But as Dennis said, we talk a bit outside, but saying that, like, you obviously have this situation, maybe you need to talk to X, Y, and Z. And hopefully you have a list of resources that they can go to. Do you want to do one more example from the list?
My time is way up.
You want to say something? No, her class need to have the room.
You need a
Oh,
room?
imagine.
So we cannot go anymore.
Okay.
This is the end of it.
Oh,
Because,
okay.
like,
That's fine.
this room is also booked.
We're done.
Okay, thank you so much. Very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Very helpful.
Thank you.